even though something in the alien's tone made him feel like a trap was about to spring shut around him. "The Zithrani Empire is generous," Marcus said carefully, "and Earth is grateful for any gesture of friendship." Velthus made a sound that might have been laughter, but sounded more like glass breaking. And he waved one of his long hands toward the back of his group, where two guards were holding something between them. Something small and wrapped in dirty cloth that Marcus had not noticed before. The guards came forward and dropped their burden on the floor in front of Marcus. And the cloth fell away to reveal a child. She was Zithrani. That much was clear from her silver blue skin and the delicate ridges along her forehead. But she was unlike any Zithrani Marcus had ever seen, because she was so thin that her bones showed through her skin, and her body was covered in scars that looked like someone had hurt her many, many times. And her eyes, two of them like a human instead of four like most of her kind, were empty and dead like windows into a house where no one lived anymore. Marcus felt his stomach turn and his hands began to shake. But he kept his face still because showing emotion in front of the Zithrani was dangerous. "What is this?" he asked. His voice flat and hard. Velthus smiled wider, and his four eyes gleamed with cruel pleasure. "This is Princess Kira, daughter of the traitor Alrin, who tried to overthrow the imperial family 5 years ago," he said as if he was talking about the weather. "Her mother was executed for her crimes, and the child was taken to be re-educated. But as you can see, she proved to be quite worthless and untrainable." Marcus looked down at the girl who had not moved or made any sound since she was thrown at his feet. And he saw that she was staring at nothing with those dead eyes, and her small hands were clenched into fists so tight that her knuckles had turned white. "She cannot speak any more," Velthus continued with that terrible smile. "And her mind is broken beyond repair, so the Empire has no use for her. And we thought that since humans are so fond of collecting broken things, she would make the perfect gift to celebrate our new peace." The other Zithrani behind him made sounds of amusement. And Marcus understood then what this really was. It was not a gift, it was an insult. The Zithrani was showing Earth that they were still superior, that they could take a princess of their own blood and break her into pieces, and then throw those pieces at the humans like garbage. And there was nothing anyone could do about it, because refusing the gift would insult them, and accepting it would mean accepting their contempt. Marcus looked at the child again and saw that she was shaking now, just a little, like a leaf in a cold wind, and he realized that she understood exactly what was happening, that she knew she was being used as a weapon to hurt and humiliate, and that she expected him to reject her, to push her away, to prove that she was truly worthless, just as they had told her. Something changed in Marcus Cole in that moment. He thought about his own childhood, about the father who had walked out and the mother who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, about the nights when he had felt like nobody in the world wanted him. And he thought about how someone, a teacher named Mrs. Patterson, had seen something in him worth saving and had pushed him to study and dream and become more than he ever thought he could be. He thought about all the speeches he had given about peace and understanding and the value of every living soul, and he thought about what kind of man he would be if he turned away from this broken child just because accepting her would be hard and humiliating. Marcus took off his coat, the warm gray one that his mother had given him before she died, and he knelt down on the cold metal floor so that he was at the same level as the girl. She flinched when he moved closer, her whole body going stiff with fear, but he did not touch her. He just held out the coat like an offering and waited. "Hello, Kira," he said softly, using her name like she was a person and not a thing. "My name is Marcus, and I am very glad to meet you." The girl did not move and did not respond, but something flickered in those empty eyes, something that might have been confusion or might have been the tiniest spark of hope that had not yet been completely Crushed Marcus gently wrapped the coat around her thin shoulders, and then stood up and turned to face Vilthus, who was no longer smiling because this was not how the game was supposed to go. "I accept your gift with great appreciation," Marcus said in a voice that was steady and strong. "Princess Kira will be given every comfort and care that Earth can provide, and I personally will ensure her well-being from this day forward." Vilthus stared at him with all four eyes, and his silver face twisted with something that looked like anger mixed with surprise. "You understand that she is damaged beyond repair," the commander said slowly. "She will never be of any use to you or anyone else." Marcus smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes, and he said words that would change his life forever. "She is a child who needs someone to love her, and that is use enough for me." He reached down and took Kira's small cold hand in his own warm one, and he felt her fingers slowly, hesitantly, curl around his. "Come on, sweetheart," he said gently. "Let us go home." And as he led her away from the Zithrani delegation, away from the cold station and the cruel laughter and the weight of an empire's contempt, Marcus Cole did not know that he had just become a father, but Kira knew she knew because for the first time in 5 years, someone had looked at her like she mattered. And even though she could not speak and could not cry and could not do anything but hold onto his hand, like it was the only real thing in the universe, she made a promise to herself in that moment. She would remember this man who had chosen her when everyone else had thrown her away. She would remember him forever. The ship that carried them back to Earth was called the Horizon, and it took 3 months to cross the darkness between stars. And during those 3 months, Marcus Cole learned that becoming a father was the hardest thing he had ever done in his entire life. Kira did not speak because she could not speak, and the doctors on the ship told Marcus that her vocal cords had been damaged, probably on purpose, probably as punishment for something she had done or said when she was younger and still had the courage to resist. And Marcus felt a cold anger in his chest when he heard this, but he did not let it show on his face because anger would not help the girl who sat in the corner of her room and stared at the wall for hours without moving. She did not eat unless Marcus ate first, taking a bite from his own plate to show her that the food was not poisoned. And even then she would only pick at her meal like a small bird afraid that someone would snatch it away. And Marcus learned to sit with her in silence and wait, always wait, because rushing her only made her retreat further into herself. She did not sleep in the bed he had prepared for her, with soft sheets and warm blankets and a pillow that smelled like lavender, because someone had told him that lavender helped people relax. No, she slept in the corner of the room, curled into a tiny ball with her back pressed against the wall so that nothing could sneak up behind her. And when Marcus found her there on the first night, his heart broke a little, but he did not try to move her. He just brought a blanket and laid it over her gently, and sat down nearby and talked to her in a quiet voice about nothing important until she finally closed her eyes. The nightmares came every night without fail. Marcus would hear her screaming through the walls, except there was not really screaming because she had no voice. It was a terrible gasping sound like someone drowning on dry land. And he would rush to her room and find her thrashing on the floor with her eyes wide open, but seeing nothing but the ghost that lived inside her head. And all he could do was sit beside her and speak softly and wait for the storm to pass. "You are safe now," he would tell her over and over. "You are safe, and no one will hurt you, and I am here, and I am not going anywhere." He did not know if she could hear him when she was trapped in those nightmares, but he said the words anyway because they were true and because he needed to believe them himself. The other people on the ship whispered about them behind their hands, wondering why the great Ambassador Cole had burdened himself with this broken alien child who would never get better. And some of them thought he was foolish, and some thought he was trying to make a political statement, and a few thought he was simply a good man who had done a good thing. But none of them really understood what was happening in that small room where Marcus sat night after night reading stories to a girl who could not respond. He read her fairy tales from Earth. Stories about princesses locked in towers and brave knights who came to rescue them. But he changed the endings because he thought she did not need to hear about princes and romance. She needed to hear about people who saved themselves. He read her books about science and space and the wonders of the universe. About black holes that swallowed light and stars that were born from dust and planets where it rained diamonds. And sometimes, when he was reading about the stars, he would see her turn her head, just a little, to look at him. And that small movement felt like a victory. He read her poetry. Simple verses about flowers and rain and the way the world looks in the early morning when everything is fresh and new. And once, just once, he saw her lips move silently as if she was trying to say the words along with him. And he had to look away quickly so she would not see the tears in his eyes. 6 months passed on Earth after they landed. And Marcus had taken a leave from his work to focus on Kira, because she needed him more than the diplomats and politicians who filled his old life. And they lived in a small house outside the city where there were trees and grass and a garden that Marcus had planted himself because his mother had always said that growing things was good for the... So Kira spent most of her time by the window, watching the world outside with those silver eyes that were slowly, so slowly, starting to look less empty. And Marcus would bring her tea and sit with her and point out the birds and the flowers and the clouds that drifted across the blue sky. And he never asked her to respond. He just talked and waited and hoped. One morning in spring, when the garden was full of yellow flowers and the air smelled like rain, Kira reached out and touched his hand. It was just a small touch, just her fingers brushing against his for a moment before she pulled away. But it was the first time she had ever reached for him voluntarily. And Marcus felt his heart swell so big that he thought it might burst right out of his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, even though he was not sure what she was thanking him for, or if she was thanking him at all. But it did not matter because something had changed between them in that small moment 2 months. Later, she smiled for the first time. They were in the garden, and Marcus was trying to teach himself how to plant tomatoes. But he kept making mistakes, and the dirt was everywhere, and he had somehow managed to get a smudge of mud on his nose. And he heard a small sound beside him and turned to see Kira with her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shaking and her eyes bright with something that looked like laughter. She was smiling. It was a tiny smile, barely there, like a flower that was just starting to open. But it was real and it was beautiful, and Marcus started laughing too. Big loud laughs that scared the birds away, and Kira did not flinch at the noise. She just kept smiling, like she'd forgotten how, but was slowly remembering on the anniversary of the day he had taken her hand on that cold space station. Marcus came to her room in the morning to bring her breakfast and found her sitting at the small desk he had given her with the tablet in her hands that he used to show her pictures and video. She held it up for him to see on the screen. In shaky letters that she had typed with her own fingers was a single word: Father Marcus Cole had given speeches to presidents and kings, and negotiated treaties that saved millions of lives, had stood firm against threats that would have broken lesser men. But nothing in his life had ever prepared him for this moment when a broken alien girl called him father for the first time. He knelt down beside her and put his arms around her thin shoulders and held her gently because she was still not comfortable with being held. And she leaned into him just a little, just enough to tell him that she was choosing to be close to him. "I am so proud of you," he said with tears running down his face. "I am so proud to be your father." And Kira, who had been thrown away like garbage by an empire that thought she was worthless, wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on tight. She had been broken, but she was not destroyed. She had been silent, but she was not gone, and now, finally, she was home. 6 years had passed since Marcus Cole brought a broken child home from a cold space station. And in that time, everything had changed. Everything except the love that had grown between a human father and his alien daughter Kira was 12 years old now. Or at least that was her age in human years, because Dithrani aged differently, and the doctors were never quite sure. But she looked like a young girl on the edge of becoming a young woman. Tall for her age with silver blue skin that had started to shimmer again like moonlight on water, which the scientists said was a sign that she was healing inside. Where it mattered most, she still could not speak with her voice. But she had learned to speak in other ways. Marcus had hired the best teachers he could find to teach her sign language, the kind that humans used, and also special signs that she invented herself for Zithrani concepts that had no human words. And she had learned so fast that her teachers said they had never seen anything like it. And within 2 years, she could have conversations about philosophy and politics and anything else that interested her. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus found an engineer named Dr. Sarah Chun who specialized in alien technology and asked her if there was any way to give Kira a voice again. Not her old voice, because that was gone forever, but a new voice that could speak for her. Dr. Chun worked for 18 months on a small device that attached behind Kira's ear and connected to a chip implanted in her brain. And when she turned it on for the first time and Kira signed the word hello, and a soft, warm voice spoke the word out loud, everyone in the room started crying, including Marcus, who was not ashamed of his tears at all. The voice was not her original voice. It was something new that Dr. Chun had created based on recordings of Kira's mother that Marcus had spent months tracking down through secret channels. And when Kira heard herself speak with a voice that sounded like the mother she barely remembered, she put her hands over her face and her shoulders shook for a long time. "Thank you," she said. Her first real spoken words in 7 years. "Thank you, Father." After that, there was no stopping her. Kira devoured books like other children devour candy, reading everything she could find about history and science and politics and law. And she had a memory that never forgot anything. Every word she read, and every face she saw, and every conversation she heard was stored away in her mind like files in a computer. And Marcus sometimes worried that she was pushing herself too hard, but he also knew that she needed this. She needed to fill her mind with knowledge, because knowledge was power. And power was the one thing that had been taken from her when she was small. By the time she was 14, she could speak 7 languages through her voice device. Not just speaking, but understanding all the tiny differences in meaning and tone that made each language unique. And diplomats who met her said she was better at reading people than most adults they knew. Probably because she had spent years watching and listening when she could not speak, learning to understand what people really meant, even when their words said something different. Marcus had returned to his work as an ambassador because Earth needed him, and because Kira had told him that hiding away in their small house was not living. It was just a different kind of prison. And she was right, because she was almost always right about things like that. So, when the Galactic Council called an emergency summit to discuss new tensions between Earth and the Zithrani Empire, Marcus had to go, and for the first time he asked Kira if she wanted to come with him. "Are you sure?" she asked with her voice device, her silver eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "They will be there, the ones who hurt me, and I do not want to cause problems for you." Marcus took her hands in his and looked at her with all the love he had spent 6 years showing her every single day. "You could never cause problems for me," he said firmly. "And you have every right to stand in that room and show them what you have become. But only if you want to, only if you are ready." Kira was quiet for a long moment, and then she nodded. "I'm ready." The summit was held on a massive station that floated between 3 solar systems. a place where representatives from dozens of species came to argue and negotiate and sometimes even make peace. And Marcus walked into the main chamber with Kira beside him wearing a simple blue dress that matched her skin and her head held high like the princess she was born to be. Zithrani delegation was already there, seated on the far side of the curved table, and at their center was High Commander Valthus, who looked older now, with lines on his silver face, but whose 4 eyes were still as cold and cruel as they had been on that day 8 years ago when he had thrown a broken child at Marcus's feet. The room went quiet when people recognized who was walking beside the human. Ambassador whispers spread like fire through dry grass, because everyone knew the story of the princess who had been given away as an insult, and everyone had assumed she was dead or locked away in some institution. But here she was alive and whole and walking into the most important political gathering in the galaxy. Like she belonged there, Velthos stared at her with all 4 of his eyes, and his face twisted into something ugly and surprised. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Why have you brought this creature here?" Kira did not flinch and did not look away and did not show any of the fear that Marcus knew she must be feeling somewhere deep inside. Instead, she smiled. A small, cold smile that reminded everyone in the room that she was Zithrani too. That she was the daughter of Adar, princess who had been brave enough to challenge an empire, even though it cost her everything. "High Commander Valthus," she said with her new voice that sounded like honey and steel mixed together. "It has been a long time since we last met. Do you remember me?" Valthus stood up from his seat, and his hands were shaking with what might have been anger or might have been fear. "You were supposed to be broken," he said. And for the first time, Marcus heard doubt in that cold voice. "You were nothing. You were garbage. You were." "I was a gift," Kira interrupted. And her voice was calm and steady, even though her hands were trembling at her sides. "You gave me to my father as an insult, and he raised me with love. And now I am here to tell you something." She paused and looked around the room at all the faces watching her. Aliens and humans and creatures from worlds she had never visited. And then she looked back at Valthus with those silver eyes that were no longer empty, but burning with a fire that had been growing for 8 long years. "I remember everything," she said. And her voice device translated the words into perfect Zithrani so that everyone from her own world would understand. "I remember what you did to me, and what you did to my mother, and what you do to everyone who dares to speak against you. And I will never forget. And I will never be silent again." The chamber erupted into chaos as the Zithrani delegation shouted, and the other representatives tried to restore order. But Marcus did not hear any of it because he was looking at his daughter with pride so big it felt like his heart would explode. She had done it. She had faced her demons and she had not broken. And this was only the beginning. 4 more years passed after that day at the summit. 4 years that changed the galaxy in ways that no one could have predicted. And at the center of it all was a young woman who had once been thrown away like garbage, but who had risen to become something that empires feared. Kira was 18 now, tall and graceful with skin that shimmered like starlight and eyes that could see through lies like glass. And she had spent those 4 years preparing for something that Marcus did not fully understand, but supported with every piece of his heart because he trusted her more than he trusted anyone else in the universe. It started slowly at first, just whispers in dark corners of the galaxy where people gathered who had suffered under the Zithrani Empire. Refugees who had fled their homes in dissidents, who had escaped execution, and families who had lost everything because they dared to speak the truth. And all of them had heard the story of the returned princess, the girl who had been broken and healed, and they wanted to meet her. Kira met with them in secret at first, traveling to hidden stations and underground colonies where Marcus could not always follow because his presence as an official ambassador would have caused political problems. But she always came back to tell him what she had learned and what she was planning. "They call me a symbol," she told him one night when they were sitting in their garden on Earth, looking up at the stars. "They think I can save them from the Empire, but I'm just one-person father. I cannot fight a war." Marcus took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You do not have to fight a war," he said. "You just have to show them that it is possible to survive. That the Empire can break people, but it cannot destroy them. And that is more powerful than any army." She looked at him with those silver eyes, and he saw something there that had not been there when she was small. A strength and a purpose that went beyond anything he had taught her. And he realized that his daughter had become someone remarkable, someone who would change history. The networks grew larger and more organized. And soon there were secret communications flowing through the galaxy, carrying messages of hope and resistance. And the Zithrani Empire began to worry because they could feel something shifting beneath their feet like the ground before an earthquake. They demanded that Earth hand over Kira, calling her a terrorist and a traitor and a threat to galactic stability. And the politicians on Earth argued for months about what to do because they were afraid of another war, and some of them thought it would be easier to just give her up. Marcus stood in front of the World Council and spoke for 3 hours about duty and honor and what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. And when he was finished, the vote was unanimous. Earth would not give up its daughter to the people who had tried to destroy hers. The Empire was furious, but they were not stupid enough to start a war over one girl. Or, at least that is what they told themselves. But the truth was that Kira was no longer just one girl. She was a movement. She was an idea. And you cannot kill an idea with soldiers and ships when the first colonies in the outer regions of the Empire began to rebel, demanding freedom and representation and an end to the cruelty that had defined Zithrani rule for centuries. The imperial family blamed Kira and called her a puppet of human imperialism. She responded by releasing the records. Her mother, Princess Alrin, had been a spy as well as a rebel, gathering evidence of every terrible thing the Empire had done for decades, hiding it in secret files that only Kira knew how to find because her mother had whispered the locations to her when she was just a child. Before they came to take them away to be punished, the records contained everything evidence of genocide against species that had refused to submit to Zithrani rule. Documents showing that millions had been killed and entire worlds had been burned to ash. Financial records proving that the imperial family had stolen wealth from their own people for generations. Communications revealing that the Empire had been planning to betray Earth and break the peace treaty as soon as it was convenient. Kira released it all to every news organization and government and court in the galaxy. And she did it with her own face and her own voice so that everyone would know who was responsible. "I am Kira, daughter of Alrin, and I bring you the truth," she said in a message that was broadcast to billions of beings across known space. "My mother died trying to expose these crimes, and I nearly died because I was her daughter. But the Empire could not silence us forever. They could not break us completely. And now the universe will see what they really are." The galaxy exploded with outraged governments that had been friendly to the Empire suddenly turned cold and distant. Trading partners canceled contracts worth trillions of credits. And inside the Empire itself, people took to the streets demanding change, demanding accountability, demanding justice for all the suffering that had been hidden for so long. The imperial family tried to fight back, calling the records fake and claiming that Kira had manufactured everything. But it was too late because the evidence was too strong and there were too many witnesses and too many victims who had been waiting their whole lives for someone to finally tell the truth. 3 outer colonies declared independence in 1 week, then 5 more, then an entire sector that contained some of the most valuable mining operations. In Zithrani space, the empire was crumbling, and Kira watched it happen from Earth, where she had returned to be with her father, who was not well, whose heart was failing after years of stress and travel and fighting battles that no one else would fight. "You did it," Marcus whispered to her one night when he was lying in his bed, and she was sitting beside him holding his hand, just like he had held hers so many years ago when she was small and broken. "You changed everything." Kira shook her head and tears were running down her silver cheeks. "We did it together, Father," she said. "I could not have become this person without you. Everything I am is because you chose to love me when everyone else threw me away." Marcus smiled and reached up to touch her face with his trembling hand. "You were always worth loving," he said. "I just helped you see it. The empire did not fall all at once. Nothing that big ever does, but it was falling, and everyone knew it. And across the galaxy, people who had lived in fear their whole lives were starting to imagine a different future. A future where they could speak and live and be free. And at the center of it all was a woman who had been a broken princess, a girl who had been an insult, a child who had been a gift. But most importantly, she was a daughter, and she would never forget the man who had made her whole. Marcus Cole died on a Tuesday in the spring, when the flowers he had planted in their garden were just beginning to bloom, and the sky was that perfect shade of blue that he had always loved. And Kira was holding his hand when his heart finally stopped beating after 71 years of a life well. Livshi had rushed back from the other side of the galaxy where she had been, negotiating the final terms of the peace agreement that would transform the old Zithrani Empire into something new and free, leaving behind meetings with presidents and generals and diplomats who all wanted her attention. Because none of that mattered as much as being with her father at the end. He had been sick for 2 years, his heart growing weaker and weaker no matter how many doctors tried to help. And Kira had wanted him to have the best alien medical technology that could extend his life by decades. But Marcus had refused. "I have lived a good life," he told her when she begged him to let her save him. "I found you when you needed me, and I watched you become the most extraordinary person I have ever known, and that is enough." That is more than enough. She had argued with him, really argued, for the first and only time in their lives together, telling him that she needed him, and that the galaxy needed him, and that he could not leave her alone when there was still so much work to do. Marcus had just smiled and taken her hand, and said the words that finally made her understand. "You were never alone, sweetheart, and you never will be, because I will always be with you in your heart, just like your mother is. And the best way you can honor me is by living your life and helping others the way I tried to help you." So she stayed with him through those final months, cutting back on her travel and her speeches and her endless meetings to spend time in the garden with him, planting tomatoes that he still could not grow properly, and laughing at his mistakes just like she had laughed when she was 12 years old, and learning how to smile again. They talked about everything during those last weeks, about the past and the future and all the moments in between. And Marcus told her stories about his childhood and his mother and the teacher who had believed in him when no one else did. And Kira told him about her dreams of a galaxy where no child would ever be thrown away like garbage, where everyone would have someone to love them on that final Tuesday. Marcus woke up one last time and looked at his daughter with eyes that were tired but full of peace. "I am so proud of you," he whispered. "My beautiful girl, my wonderful daughter. I am so proud of everything you are." Kira could not speak because her throat was too tight with grief. So she just held his hand tighter and let him see in her eyes everything she could not say out loud. Marcus smiled one last time, and then he was gone. The funeral was the largest the galaxy had ever seen for a human who was not a president or a kingships, came from hundreds of worlds, carrying representatives of species that had never visited Earth before. All of them wanting to pay respect to the man who had raised the woman who had changed everything. And the messages of condolence filled entire servers with words from beings that Marcus had never met, but whose lives he had touched. To his daughter, Kira did not speak at the public ceremony, because she could not trust herself to hold together in front of so many people. So she asked others to share their memories of Marcus instead. Diplomats who had worked with him and refugees who he had helped and children from the orphanages that he had supported quietly without ever wanting recognition, but she held a private service in their garden. Just her and the few people who had known Marcus best. And she buried him next to the memorial she had built for her mother years ago, so that the two people who had loved her most would be together forever in the years that followed. Kira became the first non-human to serve as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, a position that would have made Marcus proud beyond words. And she used that position to build the future they had dreamed about. Together, the Zithrani territories were transformed into a democratic federation where people elected their own leaders and passed their own laws. And the old imperial family was tried for their crimes and held accountable for the suffering they had caused. Not through revenge, but through justice. Because Kira remembered what Marcus had taught her about the difference between the two. She established refuges across the galaxy for children who had been abandoned or abused or thrown away like she had been. Places where they could heal and learn and discover that they were worth loving. And she visited them whenever she could to tell them her story and show them that broken things could be made whole again. She never took a title or claimed a throne, even though there were many who wanted her to become the new ruler of the Zithrani people, because she remembered what Marcus had said about serving instead of ruling, about using power to help others instead of to lift yourself above them. "I am not a queen," she said whenever people asked her why she refused. "I am a daughter and a diplomat and a servant of the people who need help. And that is all I ever want to be." On her desk in every office she ever occupied, no matter which world or station she was visiting, sat a small framed photograph of a younger Marcus Cole holding a tiny alien girl wrapped in his gray coat, both of them looking at the camera with uncertain eyes because they had not yet learned how much they would come to love each other on the back of the photograph. In Marcus's handwriting that had grown familiar to her over 2 decades of birthday cards and notes and letters were the words that she read every morning before she started her work, the day I became a father, and every night before she went to sleep. No matter how tired she was or how much weight she carried on her shoulders, Kira would look at that photograph and remember the man who had knelt down on a cold space station floor and wrapped his coat around a broken child and said the words that had saved her life. "Let us go home." She was home now. She had been home for a long time, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that every broken child in the galaxy could find their way home too, because that was what Marcus Cole would have wanted. And honoring him was the only way she knew how to say thank you for everything he had given her. The universe was vast and dark and full of cruelty, but it was also full of love. And Kira had learned from the best teacher in the galaxy that love was stronger than hate, and kindness was stronger than fear, and hope was stronger than despair. She had been an insult once, a broken thing meant to hurt and humiliate, but her father had seen something worth saving in her, and she would never stop proving him right.